1600s, a civil war was taking place in England, causing the citizens to need a scapegoat for the wrongdoing that was occurring, so they turned to the blaming of witches.
However, due to a large English civil war going on at the time, many of the records were destroyed.
What also could have contributed to the witch fear was the mass spread hysteria at the time.
So much is still unknown about how this mass hysteria of fear of witches initiated.
Let's begin our journey into witch trials in England in the 1600s.
Witches are known to be evil creatures with demonic powers, but in the 1600s, a witch could have been someone that had somewhat odd tendencies.
Witches would have sex with the devil and have weekly meetings with readings from a demonic book. The evil pact that was made mattered more than the malefica.
If they acted out or acted different in any manner, they would most likely be suspected of witchcraft.
The people accused were not very community-oriented or were the oddballs of the community.
The most commonly accused of witchcraft were the widowed, elderly, and the mentally deranged, or people who were viewed as pests to society.
Another main target of the accusations of witchcraft were spinsters and young loose women.
There were many witch hunters at the time, and more than one witch hunter general, but one of the most famous was Matthew Hopkins.
Matthew Hopkins was responsible for nearly 400 deaths from 1644 to 1647. That was more deaths from witch trials than in the past 100 years.
In March 1645, Matthew Hopkins and his partner, John Stern, brought some accusations to a local judge about a man named Sir Harbottle Grimstone. The investigation that followed unleashed the witch hunts.
After the trials, they both offered their services to local government. After they convinced them that witches were to blame for most of their problems that occurred in the realm.
The government then awarded them with the position of witchfinder generals. They traveled from village to village, accusing people of witchery.
Most of Matthew Hopkins' witch hunting was done in one area in England, known as East Anglia.
East Anglia is the area in England where he did most of his witch hunting. He also did work in a county named Essex, which is located in East Anglia.
The government would offer financial rewards for each witch that was discovered. Matthew and John were heavily rewarded as a result of their discoveries, which provided them with significant wealth.
To warn others about supposed witches, they each published and sold a book of their own.
Matthew Hopkins' book was called The Discovery of Witches. The Discovery of Witches became popular and sold many copies, especially in small villages. To this day, it is sold to museums and collectors.
As well as witch hunting, Matthew also sold products to protect citizens from witches. He also went to towns and would give speeches to its residents.
When Matthew was in towns, he would encourage people to tell on their neighbors for being witches.
This led to townspeople examining witches themselves, if they even had the slightest feeling of a person being a witch.
When examiners suspected that someone were to be a witch, the next step would be to examine them and then obtain a confession.
Matthew Hopkins himself examined hundreds of people, mostly women, to find what was known then as the devil's mark.
There were several techniques that were used to coax the confession out of the presumed witches.
One of the most often ways of testing to see if they were a witch was to push them underwater and see if they floated. If the person floated, they were claimed to be a witch.
There were many other methods for figuring out if someone was a witch, including examining them for witch marks. Witch marks supposedly could be distinguished from normal warts or hemorrhoids by keeping the witch awake for 24 hours without any of her spirits appearing to nurse at them.
The person in question would be blindfolded. They would then poke them with blunt and sharp pins repeatedly to see if the suspect would cry out in pain. If the suspect did not react to being poked, they were considered to be a witch.
Another method was to keep suspects awake and moving for as long as necessary, often for several days.
Another method was to make someone sit on a stool for several days in a cramping cross-legged position with the right toe tied to the left thumb and the left toe tied to the right thumb.
Many people who were being accused of witchcraft would confess to being a witch before being interrogated because of the torturous nature of the interrogations.
Even though they had confessed, they would often still interrogate them, so they could get other names from them.
If the suspects were concluded to be witches, they would be sentenced to death. The more deaths that occurred per town, the more money Matthew and John would make.
Anyone who also reported supposed witches to Matthew would sometimes get a small sum of money as well.
There were also other reasons for claiming someone was a witch, such as not liking them.
One of the first cases that Matthew was in charge of was a one-legged, elderly woman who was widowed.
Her name was Elizabeth Clark. She was searched by 4 women for witch marks, which she had 3 of.
When Elizabeth was arrested, she indicated other people. Among those was a girl named Rebecca West.
Indicated that she had imps named Pyewacket and Jezebel Greedyguts. She testified as a witness for the crown and was awarded immunity for prosecution.
Both Pyewacket and Jezebel Greedyguts were executed after the trial. In the 1700s, the Civil War ended, and science was becoming more widely believed in, so people began to lose belief in witchcraft. They started thinking of witchcraft as lunacy, and let go of the idea of witchcraft existing. This is the Age of Enlightenment's beginning.